So I have just been given the go-ahead from the powers that be to begin our session. So I'm very excited to start this new series. And this is the second time that I'm giving a series in the Women's Beit Midrash. Last year was the first time. So I want to thank the Women's Beit Midrash for inviting me back. And today's class is in honor of and for the sake of a refuah shalema for Meir Yoshua HaKohen ben Rezel, dedicated by his daughter Mindy Barad, and hopefully our learning will strengthen Mindy's father. Refuah shalema. I'm going to invite everybody who's able and participating in this class to leave their cameras open, because it's much more fun to be able to talk to people's faces rather than just talking to a blank screen. Naturally, we'd prefer to be in the same room and feel the atmosphere together. That's not possible. At least we should be able to see each other. One thing I've noticed over the last couple of weeks, having done so much teaching in Zoom in many different places. In fact, this morning, I managed to travel the world in ways that I never have previously. This morning I was in Mexico, last night I was in Chicago, and today I'm in Efrat. So I feel like I'm a jet setter. One of the things I noticed with Zoom is that for me to be looking at you in the eye, I have to look at the camera. But then I can't see you. So when I'm not looking at you, like at this moment, I'm really looking at you. Okay? So, well, I'll try to look at both. If anybody has a comment or a question, so I'm sure you're familiar with the raise hand function. And if you just raise your hand, then I'll notice that you're ready to, that you want to say something. And when I get to a logical point, then I will pause and invite you to add your comment or ask your question. One of the other difficulties with Zoom teaching is it's hard to get a good sense of the reaction of whether people are with you or not. So I will periodically ask, are you with me? But I also encourage you, there's the button on the screen that says reactions. So I encourage you to give me the thumbs up or the applause whenever there's a point that speaks to you or that you understand. And one of the great things, I don't know who designed this, one of the great things about Zoom reactions is you have two choices. You can either give the thumbs up or you can give a round of applause. There's no option of doing this. So you can imagine why I like this particular program. But please feel free to use those tools as well as we go through our learning. This is a 4-part series. And for this year, we've chosen to focus on Hasidic stories, but not on Hasidic stories generally, but in a very specific way, and in a way that I think is, in a sense, a little bit innovative. So let me start with a background of where the place of Hasidic stories is. We all know that in Hasidus, the Hasidim are famous for telling Hasidic stories. Many of us, I'm sure, grew up in a shul, and we remember our rabbi getting up and starting off by saying, there's a Hasidic story, and telling a Hasidic story as part of the drasha. Probably still today. And the notion of Hasidic stories is very embedded in Hasidic life, but there is an important dispute as to where can I really learn about Hasidut. What is the most important source for me to understand what the ideas of Hasidut were? One school says the most important place for Hasidut is Hasidic drashot, the Torah of the Hasidim. Toldot Yaakov Yosef, Kedushat Levi, Noam Elimelech, and going on. The other school says, drashot. There are many drashot. That's not a chidush of Hasidut. The chidush of Hasidut is in the stories. And the stories is where we can really learn about Hasidut. Now let me ask you, who is the spokesperson for each one of those opinions? Let's start with the spokesperson for the main place to learn about Hasidut is in the drashot, and not the stories. Who is the spokesperson for that approach? Anybody?
Lubavitch?
No, not Lubavitch. Not Lubavitch. Lubavitch is good that you're saying Lubavitch, Pnina, but they are not the spokesperson of this approach because they were far more integrated than. I'm looking for someone who was really just get rid of stories, just Torahs. You give in? No ideas? Lembergers. You have to unmute yourself if you want to say something. You don't know how to unmute yourself. You do, but you don't know what to say. Okay.
The Baal Shem Tov?
The Baal Shem Tov. I want to first of all acknowledge that I'm very honored that my mother-in-law has joined us today. And I certainly wouldn't dare in public contradict my mother-in-law. It's a very good answer, the Baal Shem Tov, because the Baal Shem Tov in truth did not leave any drashot. However, the Baal Shem Tov also didn't leave any stories. All the Baal Shem Tov, he didn't leave any written works. So we only have the way the students described or reported to us what the Baal Shem Tov said. But it's true that there was an emphasis on orality in the Baal Shem Tov. Leah Weber, would you like to add something?
Rav Nachman.
Rav Nachman of Breslov. Rav Nachman, excellent guess. Rav Nachman of Breslov, very famous as a storyteller. He has very involved stories that are unlike the rest of the corpus of Hasidic stories. But Rav Nachman also, in his lifetime, printed a Hasidic work called Likutei Moharan. He prepared that work, which means that he also integrated that approach. I can see that everybody here is, you're all steeped in Hasidic history, but the person we're really thinking about is Gershom Sholem. Gershom Sholem, who instigated the academic study of Hasidus, he said, Hasidic stories, that's not the real thing. If you really want to learn about Hasidus, the place to really learn about Hasidus is in the drashot. And now that I've given you who the spokesperson for that approach was, who was the spokesperson for the diametrically opposite approach? Only Hasidic stories. Forget about the drashot. There's nothing special about the drashot. Excellent. Leah Weber, first guess. Leah Weber's right. Martin Buber. Martin Buber's collection of Hasidic stories is the way many Hasidic stories were brought into the public sphere. Many of us grew up perhaps in communities or in shuls that there wasn't a Hasidic shul, and the access, certainly of modern people, to Hasidic stories was very often through Buber, which is problematic because Buber made up some of the stories. And he was very honest about it. Even the stories that he didn't make up, he rewrote. And he didn't hide it. If you go through Buber's 2 volumes, in English it's 2 volumes, Tales of the Hasidism, you'll notice that there is never a Hasidic master. Here I can see the Lembergers looking for the copy of their book. The Tales of the Hasidim, which he originally wrote in German. It was translated into Hebrew or Haganuz and into English. Buber's work, if you go through the entire work, you'll be hard-pressed to find a Hasidic master doing anything connected to halacha. Not in favor and not against. Because Buber wasn't someone who was interested in halacha, and therefore all of Buber's stories are don't involve halacha. Not in favor, not against. It's just not there, which suited Buber's narrative. And that's also why rabbis found this as a very good source to bring in their drashot, because you could spit, the rabbi, what's he going to talk about? Talk about Yiddishkeit. So Yiddishkeit, you could bring a story from Buber without telling your community to keep halacha. So it was very versatile, and he was very often cited by many people. And Buber was the other extreme. Who was right, Buber or Sholem? You already know the answer. You've answered it already. Where those of you who said Lubavitch and Breslev, and if we were to go further afield, every Hasidic group, we all know that neither of them were right. And the truth is, if you want to get a sense of Hasidus, we need an integrated approach. We need to also see the stories. They tell part of the story. The drashot tell another part of the story. We need both of them. And now I want to take this point one step further. Nowadays, we recognize that that's not enough. And there are even other sources that we have to have a look at in order to get the fuller picture. My personal work is on halacha and Hasidut. Halachic works written by Hasidic masters, very important perspective to understand what the relationship between Hasidut and halacha is. Halacha and Hasidut. But there's also archives, kitvei pulmus, polemic writings, letters. There's a lot of other sources that we now understand you need to have a look at in order to integrate and have a real picture of what Hasidut was about. So my first point for today is to place stories, Hasidic stories, within the world of what Hasidus is. Any questions on that first point? Questions or comments? No comments. Let's continue. Now, when we look at Hasidic stories, there are many people that look at Hasidic stories and they want to know, they're bothered by one question. Are they true? Is it true? And I can tell you, this morning in Mexico, I taught a class, and that is exactly what they kept on coming back to. They kept asking me, what about Hasidic stories? But is it true? And I said, the first time I said it very clear, I said, no, it doesn't have to be true. It's not about historical truth. And that drove them crazy. So what, they're lying? So I tried to explain to them that when we look at Hasidic stories, the Hasidic storyteller is not telling the story because the storyteller is a historian. He or she is not an historian. The storyteller is trying to fashion communal identity, create a narrative to help the collective memory take shape. And if that's the goal of Hasidic stories, then asking the question, is it historic? It's the wrong question to ask. It's like going into a butcher shop and asking them to fill the prescription. You're in the wrong place. If you want history, go to history. Here, we're looking at narrative. Now, does that mean that everything in the Hasidic story is all just made up? Does that mean there's no historical data that could be mined or found or plucked from within the story? No. Very often, the Hasidic story will have elements of history. In fact, it's a literary device to include some historic information. Why? Because if you include historic information, then when you read that, then it connects to a whole other world in your mind. It's not entirely fantasy. It connects to other points, and it seduces or brings the reader into the story. You with me? You got that? I'll just tell you, do you know how I finally got the point across to my friends in Mexico? I said, imagine you're reading Harry Potter. I said Harry Potter, then they understood what I was talking about. Harry Potter, which I don't think is the best example in this case. But then they understood that they're not looking, you don't read Harry Potter for truth, even though we know that there are elements of Harry Potter that draw on and that remind us of other things, of other ideas from our world. Harry Potter's for enjoyment. Hasidic stories, there is an element of enjoyment, but that's not the main goal. The main goal of Hasidic stories is to awaken a person. The Heilige Rishon, Rabbi Yisrael of Ruzhin, said, was a great storyteller, and he said, the world tells stories as bedtime stories to put people to sleep. In our tradition, we tell stories to awaken people, to arouse them to Avodas Hashem. And if you think about it, it goes back to the Tanakh. The Torah starts off, the entire Sefer Bereshis, the lion's share of Sefer Shmos is all stories. In other words, we start our tradition with stories. And Hasidus in that way is continuing the tradition of stories. So I've already put outside one vector of looking at stories, which is history, the historic search. There's another vector of looking at stories that I also want to recognize and then move aside. And there are those who have looked at Hasidic stories as archaeological projects. That is the top layer. And what we need to do is, with the stories, we need to dig down and to try to find what the roots of that story are. What are the antecedents of the story? Sometimes, like, do we find the story in other traditions? Does this story play off a biblical story? Does this story appear in Sefer Hasidim? Or in the Talmud? Where else does the story appear? And those excavating projects, there are a number of scholars who favor that approach, as an attempt to try to understand a Hasidic story. We may do that a little bit today if we have time, but I would like in this series to focus on a third vector, and that is not trying to find the historical kernels, that is not excavating back, but rather starting with the earliest Hasidic version and then tracking the story as it moves forward. What do I mean by tracking the story as it moves forward? How is a Hasidic story retold, recast? How is it used and reused in successive generations? And what changes to that story are affected? So that is the methodological approach that I would like to share with you. And I think that there aren't many people who have adopted this approach. It's still a relatively new approach. And I'm sharing with you research that I'm working on that has not yet been published, but it's in preparation. And what we're going to do in this series is take one story, and you'll see how through that one story, an entire world will be opened up. Not a world, worlds. And what we're going to do is we're going to take a Hasidic story, not any Hasidic story. We're going to take what may be the most famous Hasidic story. What's the most famous Hasidic story? So I'm not asking you to answer what's the most famous. You all know the story. I'm going to tell you which story it is, and you're straight away going to say to me, I know the story. You know the boy who comes in on Yom Kippur, doesn't know how to read? Everybody knows, right? Does some balagan. Ms. Lemberger doesn't know the story. I'm glad you're here. Worth coming. We're going to see, so Ms. Lemberger is going to learn the story for the first time. And the others who are familiar with a version of the story will have the opportunity to track the story from its earliest retelling. I want to already go to the text so that we can make sure we at least read one version today. And I want to analyze the text. I'm now going to share my screen with you. This text was printed in a work called Kvutzat Yaakov in 1896. 1896, and it's a story that mentions the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov died in the year on Shavuot 1860, exactly 260 years ago. So if the Baal Shem Tov died in 1760, and the story is first printed in 1896, what can we say about the historicity of the story? I see Scott, who's doing this with his head, and I agree totally with Scott. What Scott is doing with his head is, what he's saying is, not much. And that's true. You can't say much about it. How do you say anything when you've got a lag of so many years? We're talking about 100. If the story happened in the Baal Shem Tov's life, 150 years. So the story here is not even trying to be historic, even though the writer claims that his grandfather knew the Baal Shem Tov. But this is the first time the story was ever printed, 1896. The story is printed in 1896 and then gets printed a year later. A year later, let's see if we can get that up. A year later. No. There we are, a year later. First it's printed in Berdichev, and then it's printed in Przemysl in 1897. And this collection of stories becomes nothing less than a bestseller. You wouldn't know it because who's heard of the work Kvutzat Yaakov? Who's heard of Kvutzat Yaakov? Excellent. Nobody. None of you have heard of Kvutzat Yaakov except for Yisrael, who studied with me previously. Kvutzat Yaakov and Masha, sorry. You need a wide screen in the Donchik household. So except for Yisrael and Masha, no one's heard of the Kvutzat Yaakov for the very simple reason. The work was forgotten by the sands of time, except for section 7 of the work, a collection of Hasidic stories, which was reprinted under different titles. Here you can see 3 years later, the work Emunat Tzadikim takes the stories that are in Kvutzat Yaakov and reprints it. And the work is reprinted in Emunat Tzadikim in a work called Kahal Hasidim Hechadash, Gdolim Maasei Tzadikim, 3 different titles. And it's reprinted numerous times. It's reprinted also, and then at one stage, look at that, 1904. What do you see on the screen? What language can you see? What do you see? Esther, what can you see, Esther?
Yiddish.
It's Yiddish.
Yiddish, Mamalushan. The story, which was probably originally told in Yiddish, was then translated into Hebrew, and then 8 years later, after it was printed, it's translated back into Yiddish. And over 100 years between the year 1896 and the year 1996, this collection is reprinted under different titles 20 times. Now, I don't know how many of you are into printing history. That means on average, once every 5 years. That is extremely popular. So the story we're going to have a look at, everybody knows because it's printed, and we'll see in future classes, it's retold. The original version is what we're going to have a look at now. Let's go to any questions or comments on the printing history before I go to the text itself. Are you with me, team? You're here, yes? Okay. I'll now share with you the text. You've received it already. And I'm going to now share it with you in a second. Here we are. You can all see the text in front of you. And Aliza has also shared that text with you, so you can see it. You have it in your own notes. Let's read the story together. Even though you know the story, we're not looking at this point because you don't know the story except for Mrs. Lemberger. We're not looking just to learn the story. We're also looking to analyze it in the next half an hour. Ish Kafri Echad, a certain villager, Shahaya Mispalel Tamid Yamim Noraim Beveit Midrasho Shel Baal Shem Tov, who would always pray in the Beis Medrash of the Baal Shem Tov. So we're already tapping into something historical. People who lived in places where there perhaps wasn't a minyan, and for Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, the Yomim Noraim, they would travel in order to daven in the Beit Midrash in a communal Beit Midrash, and this particular our villager went to the Beis Medrash of the Baal Shem Tov. And the villager Hayalo Yeled Echad Otum Leiv Ma'oid. He had a child that, strange language, whose heart was very sealed. And he wasn't able to receive the letter forms, and certainly wasn't able to say anything, any holy thing, meaning he wasn't able to participate in davening. Who can translate that for us into modern language? What are we saying here? What type of child is this?
Maybe he's autistic.
Autistic, perhaps. Maybe he's got autism, a child with autism. Maybe a child with dyslexia, some type of physical, emotional disability, ADD. I don't know. In 1896, when this story is printed, they don't have, certainly in this area, in Poland, they don't have this such an idea, all these ideas about what could be the issues. So there's a description here of a child who doesn't know, is not able to participate, unable to learn to read. And his father did not take him with him to the city on the Yomim Noraim. Because he doesn't know anything. What's he going to do? What do we do on Yom Kippur? You go to shul on Yom Kippur, and what do you do? What do you do? What do you do? I'm sure in Efrat also, no? Not just in Tzor Hadassah. Daven. That's all we do. That's what we do on Yom Kippur. So what are you going to take a boy who doesn't know how to read to shul on Yom Kippur? So he doesn't take him. But kasher nasa bar mitzvah, lekocha imay al Yom Kippurim. When the child became bar mitzvah, he took him for Yom Kippur. Why? Sheyeh ito imo l'shomroi shelo yochal b'yom hakadosh l'chesron yadi osoi v'havon osoi. Comes along, is now bar mitzvah. And when the child's bar mitzvah, it's time to take him. Why do we have to take him for when he's bar mitzvah? Because otherwise, he might eat. This kid has no idea. So therefore, he takes him to make sure that he doesn't eat. Everybody with me? Vayeled, and this child, 13-year-old, Hayaloi Khalil, he had a flute. Shayam Machalel Tomid Be'es Yoshvei Basada, that he would play constantly when he would sit in the field. Leroy says Atzoin V'Ha'agolim, when he would look after, when he would shepherd the sheep. I don't think that's really a word in English. Or the cattle. V'lokach itoi imoi bekis bigdoi es hacholil, and he took the flute with him in his pocket of his clothing. V'aviv lo yada mizeh. and his father did not know it. Hanar, okay, so maybe let's just a literary perspective here. When it says over here that he would shahaya mechalel tomid be'es yoshvei besode lirois esatzoin v'ha'agalim, that suddenly we have this pastoral scene. And for those people who would be steeped in the traditions of Hasidus, this might remind us, and I put it on the second sheet, of the Baal Shem Tov. And the Baal Shem, side 2 of the sheet, the Baal Shem Tov is described in the earliest collection of Hasidic stories of the Baal Shem Tov. He is described as he starts his career as a young boy who doesn't want to go to school. And he's an orphan, so the community is concerned about him, and they give him a malamed, they pay for a malamed that's going to look after him. And what would the Baal Shem Tov do? Let's just have a look at one line. He would run to the fields, to the forest, to do hitbodedut, to meditate on his own, a 13-year-old boy. So when we have our boy, going back to our story, when we have our boy who sits in the field, that would automatically, to a listener, remind the listener of, we've got to map some person who's got some connection to nature. Back to our story. Hanar haya yoshev kol hame'es la'es hakadosh beveis hamedrash. The lad would sit the entire 24-hour period in the Beis Medrash, ve'eno yochol loymar me'uma, and he wasn't able to say anything. We know why he wasn't able to say anything. The kid doesn't know how to read. He doesn't know how to daven. He's never been to shul before. Be'ez tfilas musaf. When it comes to musaf, Amar Aviv, Avi. Now, Avi, you have to also imagine, right? This is a translation. So what would have he said? He wouldn't have said Avi. What would he have said?
Tati.
Tata. Tata she. Yesh iti imi hecholel shali. I have with me my flute. Vani wrote to me, kol ale cholel. I really want to make a sound with my flute. V'nisbahel aviv moed, and his father was really shocked. V'gar boy, and he was alarmed, and he warned him. V'amar loy, hishomer lachol shmor nafshecha lebal ta'ases hadavar hazeh. Don't you dare! In the middle of shul, you're going to play your flute. V'huchrach li'sapek. The child had to hold back. Be'ez tfilas mincha. Amar lo oidapam. Comes along mincha, and he says to him again, Avi, tatashi, harein harsheni liten kol. Let me make a sound. Ulachalel b'chalel sheli. This is beautiful literary stuff here. Ulachalel b'chalel sheli. Let me, what does he want to do? What does the child want to do?
He wants to play on his flute, but it's also a chilul.
Ah, excellent. Ulachalel b'chalil. Now, what is the word? How do we say you play a flute? So not talking about in modern Hebrew. In rabbinic Hebrew, the term is, and that's on the second side of your sheet as well. You have a look at the Mishnah here. The chalil makeh. You see that? The chalil makeh. We're talking about the Mishnah over here. He's talking about when in the Beis Hamikdash they would play the flute. The flute was some woodwind instrument. Was the major instrument in the temple service. It's mentioned in a number of places, and it's described, the verb for playing a cholil is makeh. You can see also the Rambam in describing Simchas Beis HaSha'eva also refers to cholil makeh. Why would you hit a cholil? We know that cholil means empty, and we have pictures, so we know we're talking about some type of flute instrument, some type of woodwind instrument. But makeh, we're referring to the fingers as you cover the holes. Makeh, you would hit those holes. So that's the phrase in Rabbinic Hebrew. It's true, and I put this on the sheet as well. In one place in the Torah, in the Tanakh, we have mechalalim b'chalilim. Appears once in the Torah, but Rabbinic Hebrew didn't adopt that form. And every other time in Rabbinic Hebrew, we have makeh b'chalil. Here, the storyteller chooses something else, and Sarah Joe straight away picked up on it. The child says, I want to be mechalel b'chalil. Hebrew works that way. We all know that. Certainly those of us who came to Hebrew not as our first language, we all know that you can turn any word into a verb. If you want to Google something, legalgel, right? You want to telephone, you want to ring somebody, letalfen. Any word, any noun can be turned into a verb. I just heard from my nephew.
Can I ask a question, please? I want to know, well, didn't we say this was originally written in Yiddish and then translated? So I want to know, how much do we have to be makpid on the words? Because I have other, is this Tanakh that we have to? Right, I'm saying, how much do we have to be, it was written this way as opposed to this way, especially since I think we're seeing a translation.
Right, so we are seeing a translation, but I am arguing that the translator was the person who's writing the text is using a literary device. So I don't think the word makpid and Tanakh is the right way, but as we would look at any literary work, we would look at various allusions in the text. And in this case, whether it was intentional or not, obviously I can't say. I don't know enough about the person who wrote it, but it actually works out in a beautiful way, because look at this. Harsheni litain kol ulachalel b'chalil shali. The son, the young lad says, let me make a sound and play my flute. Esther, what did the father hear?
That he wanted to be Mechalel Yom Kippur.
Let me make a sound, ulachalel, and desecrate with my flute. It works out from a literary perspective, nothing short of brilliant. V'kilel oisoi klolo nimretzes. And his father gave him a harsh curse, told him off. V'izir by Bazhara Rabba, and he warned him leval yarhiv benafshoy, that he shouldn't dare. Chalila. Yeah, you see the same word. What is Chalila? Chalila appears in the Torah a number of times. Chalila numayasais kadavar hazeh. Heaven forfend. You want to be Mechalel b'Chalil? Chalila. Heaven forfend. Don't you that you should do such a thing la'asois kazois, to do this. Now this is the solution over here is easy. Anybody here who's participating, who's a parent, we've all done it. What do you do when your child's playing with something that you don't want them to play with?
Take it away.
Take it away. Take it away. Take it away and put it in a place they can confiscate it. Simple solution. You're so nervous, Yom Kippur, just take it away. Why can't the father take it away? Ya'an kihu muktzah. The flute's muktzah, so he can't touch it. Now that's going to play into the story later on. We can see the father, he's very aware of halacha. That's what he's thinking about. Let's continue. After mincha, he said to him, Father, please, whatever it is, just let me play, desecrate some noise. When his father saw the boy's burning desire, and when he saw that he really wanted to, play, desecrate, Amar Livnoi changed his tactic. Where are you holding the flute? And he showed him. He held on to the pocket. He held on to the pocket and onto the flute. Lishmar, holding on, Leval yikachenu l'chalal imay, that the child shouldn't take it to desecrate play. V'chein hispalel tfilas ne'ilah, and that's the way he davened ne'ilah. V'yodoi machzekes es kis beged hanar im hechalil, and his hand was holding on to the pocket of his son with the chalil. So just imagine ne'ilah. I'm very fortunate. I brought a prop with me for this. This is my son. Imagine davening, and the whole time he's holding on to the pocket of his son. What type of davening is that? Thank you, Itai. Guest appearance. What type of davening is that?
That he brought his son to show.
What type of davening? What type of davening is that? If you're holding on to a son, holding on to the pocket of somebody next to you. Be'emtza hatfilah. Now, the father reacted. You can see what's going on here. The entire story is built, it escalates. And as the story escalates, we see each side escalating. So the father does something violent, physical. So the son responds with something violent, physical. The child pulls out with great strength the flute from the pocket, from his pocket and from his father's hand. And he made a tremendous sound with the flute. Now let me ask you, friends, what part of the service does this happen in, according to this version of the story? Ne'ilah, right? Ne'ilah, but when in Ne'ilah? When in Ne'ilah? Anne, when do you think? You with us, Anne?
Yeah, it's in the middle of Tfilat Amidah.
Tfilat Amidah, of course, right? Be'emtza Tfilah. So what's the soundscape at that moment? What do we hear? What's going on? What's the sound of Tfilat Ne'ilah? What do you hear on Tfilat Ne'ilah?
Silence here.
You see it. Silence. What else? Not just silence.
Bechi.
You hear Sarah Jo adds crying. You hear people, right? You hear the movement. You might hear a chair shuffle. You hear a person's talus tzitzis banging against the leg. You hear people's pages turning. The little kids are still counting the pages. Don't you remember that? When we were little, we used to count pages until we realize. I say little because now we realize it's got nothing to do with the pages. It's time. But when you're little, you count pages until your parent tells you, no, it's not pages. It goes by time. Rosh Hashanah's pages, Yom Kippur's time. So there's a certain sound, a silence, but it's not silence. And out of that comes this sound of the Chalil. At that moment, Tom hu kol hashoimim, all the people who heard were like, it's like it's an intervention. It doesn't make sense. It's not part of the soundtrack of what we expect. And everybody is shocked. V'habesht acharei hakol hazeh, after this sound, kitzer mehergeloi. The best after the boy made that sound, he finished up his davening. V'amar achar tefillah, and after the service, he explained what had happened. He turned to those who were around him and he explains, and he says, "Hanar hazeh, this lad, im kol chalilosoi, with the sound of his three meanings: the sound of his flute, the sound of his desecration, and the sound of what one dare not do. With the sound of his chalilosoi, he raised up all the prayers and he made it easier for me. V'amar, and the Baal Shem Tov explained, he doesn't know how to say anything. And when, during the entire holy day, he saw the great tefillah of Israel, the nitzoitz kodshei ba'arabai, k'may eish mamish, A holy spark burned inside of him like fire, real fire. Vayodea, someone who knows. When you've got a fire burning inside of you, Yachol lahalbish taveras hakadusha v'hatshuka b'tevas hatfila lefonav yisparach. You can enrobe, you can dress those words, that desire into the words of tefillah. Achu eino yodea ma'uma. But he, the boy, he doesn't know anything. He couldn't find a way to satiate his spiritual thirst. The only thing he could do, only by playing, desecrating with his chalil, with his flute before God. The father stopped him. And the fire of his desire was burning inside of him. Each time more, until, and it's a hard phrase to explain, to translate, until his soul was about to expire, or until the depths of his soul, some people like to describe it, until the end of his soul. And with the power of his spiritual desire. Chilel, played, desecrated. Ba'amitas nekudas levavoi, with the point of his heart, the true point of his heart. Nekudas levavoi, the pintaliyid, the point in his heart. V'loi shum pniya, with no other distractions, no other thoughts, no other considerations. Rak noki lishmo yisbarach, purely for God. Now look at the next three words, because they're the key words. V'rachmana libabai, and the merciful one desires the heart. V'hevel piv anakia, and his pure breath. Niskabel ma'od l'rotzon lefonav yisbarach, his pure breath was received up in heaven. Va'al yedei zeh he'elah es kol hatfilos, he raised all the tefillot, all the prayers. Comments before we try to take a few steps further. What an unbelievable story, no?
Amazing story.
Right. Who has seen the original? You all know, Mrs. Lemberger, you know the story as well, right? Sorry, what did you say? Now you know it as well?
Yes, now I know it.
Good. So now we all know the story. But it's not just that we all know the story. You have all read this story in the original. How many of you had seen this story in the original beforehand?
Yeah.
Raise your hand.
What other versions, I'll come back to you in a second, Nisal and Marsha, what other versions have you seen?
We all know the story of the little boy who comes to shul and plays the Khalil. But here we have the version with the father and the father preventing him. That part of it,
Okay, so
I didn't know.
Okay, good. Thank you, Mr. Lemberger. John, thank you. Okay, so you knew about the Khalil. Did anyone else have any other versions of the story that they had encountered?
That he whistles.
Whistled. Thank you, Anne. We'll come back to Anne in next class or the class after with the whistling. Where did that come from? We'll come back to that. Any other versions? Yes, Marsha.
In later versions, he's not mechalel anything because he just yells out the aleph bet.
Excellent.
Version.
Right, we have the aleph bet. Eliza's Zaddy also said that in the chat, and so did Marsha. He says the aleph bet. What's going on? We'll come back to those versions, and in our next class or the class after, when we have a look at alternative of what people did to this story. Let's focus on this story for a moment and spend our final 10 minutes together on what we can take out of the story. This story, sorry, yes, Leah.
Well, Leah's husband. For a Litvish take on this story, what happened to the halacha? What happened to the playing an instrument on Yom Tov?
Okay. Leah's husband. You don't have to be a Litvak to ask that question. That's a question that every Chosin needs to ask of this question, of this text as well. What's going on over here? That's what we're going to come back to that question in greater depth in the following classes. So I hope you'll join us. But for now, let's just first understand the power and the draw of the story. The story over here is antinomian. Are you all familiar with that word? Antinomian. Nomos in Greek means law. Antinomian, it's against law. The father, who could be, in some ways in the story, and I feel for the father, but in some ways he's cast here as the villain. The father is halacha. The child represents the spirit. And in that clash, the spirit is the one that's given primacy in this version. Who's the hero of the story? Who do you think the hero of the story is?
Oh.
Baruch, who's the hero, Sarah Jo?
The Baal Shem Tov.
Clearly the Baal Shem Tov. Definitely the Baal Shem Tov. It's definitely the Baal Shem Tov. No, it's not
being serious. It's not the Baal Shem Tov. It's the boy.
No, I argue with you, Sarah Jo. I think the child is. I don't no disrespect for the child, but the child's not the hero of this version. I'm so glad that I last night added onto the sheet on the second side one of the antecedents of this story from Sefer Hasidim. We don't have time to read through it. You can have a look at it. In the antecedent of the story, one of the versions that came before that was part of collective memory, there's no Baal Shem Tov figure.
Wow.
Let me play it out for you for a second. You're the father, and it's your kid that just blew a flute in the shul. What do you do at that moment? What do you do at that very moment?
Smack him up and drag him out.
What?
Smack him up and drag him out.
Hey, Leah Weber's husband, who one day will be Zocher to have his own name, perhaps. Leah Weber's husband described how Leah Weber's husband would grab the young Werber and grab him by the scruff of his neck and schlep him out of the shul as fast as he could. Did I get you right?
That's it.
That's right. And I don't think it's because Mr. Werber is a Litvak. I think every one of us would have done that. Every one of us would have grabbed him out, taken our child by the scruff of the neck, schlepped him out of shul, and got as far away as possible. Could you imagine the embarrassment? And the father would be walking away thinking to himself, number one, I'm never going back to that shul. Number two, even when I decide one day, when I get over the trauma of what just happened, I'm certainly not taking him. Which means, Sarah Jo, that the boy and the father are not there, if I'm right in my reading. Mm-hmm. The boy and the father are not even there to hear the Baal Shem Tov's explanation. The father leaves thinking that the son had desecrated Yom Kippur. He never knows that the Baal Shem Tov says, Rachmana libabai. And therefore, even though the child is attractive, he's not the hero in this version of the tale. But this version of the tale is extremely dangerous. I want to take you now for a moment, bring you all to Tzur Hadassah, to my shul. Imagine the following scenario. Kol Nidre night, I get up in my shul and I tell this story. And I have the whole crowd, I have my shul in Tzur Hadassah, Yom Kippur, even though we're not a religious yishuv, the shuls are packed wall to wall. Hard to imagine nowadays, huh? Shuls are packed. And I get up in my shul, so far it's all true. This part now is my imagination. I get up in my shul, and for my drosha at Kol Nidre, I tell this story. and I have the whole shul community with me, and everybody's listening, and they come over, and I feel great about it, and they come over to me afterwards, and they say, Shkoyach, Rashay Yafa, Kol HaKavod, Rabbi, I really appreciated the sermon, you're a great storyteller. They go on. I feel very good about myself. I go home, come back the next morning, I'm the rabbi, I have to come to shul on time. I get there to open the shul. I open the shul, and in a distance, I see some of the youth walking to shul. Youth coming on time. Think to myself, my drosha was good last night, but to such an extent that the youth are going to come on time? Wow. And as they get a bit closer, I see that there's something glimmering. And there's a little bit of a sparkle that they seem to be carrying with them. And as they get closer, my excitement at the youth arriving on time turns to dread as I see that they're coming. And what are they carrying?
The guitar.
One of them's carrying his electric guitar. The other one's carrying a saxophone. The third one's bringing his drums. And I am shocked. What am I going to do? And I'm standing there rooted to the door of the shul, not knowing where to go, how to hide. They come over to me and they say to me, Rabbi, where can I plug my guitar in? Yom Kippur. And they see that I'm not so excited about it. They say, but Rabbi, we were here last night. Rahman Alibabai, the merciful one desires the heart. Oy vey. So you can see how dangerous this story can be. And we can already understand why other versions of the story that you've already mentioned that we'll have a look at next class, why other versions of the story changed certain details. That's what we're going to have a look at next class. For this class, let us end off our class. If there are any questions or comments before I say my concluding comments. So to end off, to conclude for today's session, while the story is a dangerous story that will lead in other directions, the story also is tremendously powerful. The danger is the flip side of its power. It is a potent story. And the potency of the story, my friends, is that the story recalibrates what we're doing in shul. And it says, don't just be here and worried about muktzah. Rahmano libabai. And that's why we have here another literary device. Notice the entire story appears in Hebrew. There are only 3 words in the entire story, one phrase that appears in another language, in Aramaic. Rahman Alibabai. Now, nowadays, I was able, while we were looking through the text, to highlight, right? You saw I highlighted the text, and you can do Control B and bold and underline and all these different things. How do you emphasize a word in a traditional text? You change the language. By changing the language in the middle of the text, you then refocus. The phrase Rahman Alibabai does not appear in the Gemara. In the Gemara, it appears in a different, the idea appears. The phrase itself appears in Chovot HaLevavot, which means that the storyteller chose a phrase that would draw you out. Rahman Alibabai. And the message of this story, and that we'll end with today, is that this story tells us one of the central themes of Hasidut, that we need to also be focused on the heart. Rahmana liba boy. We'll leave it there for today.
Fabulous, Levi. Fabulous job.
I look forward to seeing you all next week. And I hope to continue the journey. We have a lot more to do with this very story, other versions and what people have done to it, all that and more next Friday.
Thank you. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Thank you. Shabbat shalom. Beautiful.
Thank you. Shabbat shalom.